and then go from there. Sometimes you just get lucky. So some of you may have found, this is a big sphinx moth. It's a wavy lined sphinx moth caterpillar. And when they get large, they go roaming and looking for a soft place to pupate. And so you do find caterpillars during the day, especially the big ones that sort of jump out at you. But the majority of the time you have to go actually searching them out. Sure, I have my title page. Okay. So a quick review of, let's see, why am I not advancing here? I should be, hang on a second. Do not. All right, it advanced earlier. Let me see what's going on here. Try again. Share, maybe it just got hung up. Nope, maybe I am not on the correct one. Try this. I don't know why they're two open there. There we go. Okay. So this is considered our pyramid of energy, our energy pyramid in ecology, and it should be probably somewhat familiar to all of you. The producers and all of our plants are on the bottom level, and you see that there is a decrease in biomass as you go up, and the primary consumers are mostly insects. So you see that they are critical to the rest of the ecosystem. They and the plants are basically supporting the rest of the ecosystem. There have been a number of research studies at this point that show anywhere from a 20% to a 45% decline in species over the last 40 years. The first couple of studies were looked at skeptically, but since then there have been more studies, and despite lots of different changes in ecosystems and environmental conditions, it seems to be holding that we are nearing an apocalyptic collapse of the insect populations. Why is this important? Partly because they support the other organisms above them. They are important for the energy transfer. It starts with the sun, goes to the plants, and on through this pyramid. They are a significant source of food, especially for our songbirds. And they're also food for mammals. Bats are extremely reliant on the moth population at night. They are recyclers, so recyclers and decomposers. And as many people know at this point, they are pollinators, and without them, our flowering plant population would collapse. So a quick review, I am going to focus on moths in particular, and I'll explain why in a second, but both moths and butterflies belong to the same order, and they have complete metamorphosis. And just a quick review, they go from an egg, they go through a number of stages that are called instars, and those are our caterpillars. They pupate or make a chrysalis. The pupa itself is just a hardened skin on the outside, and then some of our moths actually spin or use leaves to cover that pupa up as well. Some of the pupas dig down into the ground, and they need soft dirt in order to do this. And then they emerge as a moth or a butterfly. I will be talking about when you're most likely to find caterpillars. And one of the things that different species do is have one generation during the summer or more than one generation. Here in the Northeast, we tend to have at the most species with two, not more than that. If you go south, they have 3 and 4 sometimes. But this will make a difference on the range that you're likely to find the caterpillars, and I'll talk more about that as we go. The Lepidoptera are known as the scaled wings. There's real quick, probably many of you are familiar with this, but butterflies are mostly diurnal. They have slender bodies, they're brightly colored. They have a hardened skin or a chrysalis for their pupal stage. They have clubbed or hooked antennae. The antennae are these little fine appendages that are sticking out of the head, and they rest with their wings upright. There are 73 species described in Barnstable County. This is over a period of time, so that doesn't mean they're all around at this point, and it doesn't mean necessarily that a species they found up in the Sandwich area might be found in Chatham. So this is a total number, not necessarily a location-specific number. And they're represented by 6 families. So if you remember your order of taxonomy a little bit, it's a fairly reduced number of families for the butterflies. Moths are generally thick-bodied, generally nocturnal, generally drab in color. So I'm being safe because you'll notice there are some generalities here because there are always exceptions in the natural world. They spin a cocoon or pupate underground, in which case they basically just have a hardened skin. They have feathery or hair-like antennae, and they rest with their wings flat rather than up over their back. There are 1,685 species described for Barnstable County. This is available online. And you can't sort by Barnstable County. So last winter when I started to get involved in this project, I spent quite a few nights going through and making a copy in a spreadsheet and then deleting all the other counties' work. However, this information was compiled by a couple of entomologists from historical papers. So some of the records go back to the 30s. And there hasn't been any checking on whether those species are still present. And the other thing I noticed is that there were very few that were described from Chatham. So again, many of the species might be found in the Upper Cape, but we most likely have a less diverse population here. Okay, let me see how I get back out of here. I'm still sharing. Oops. Okay, maybe I have to go back this way. Share. Nope. Huh. I got too fancy for myself. Go back. Sorry, guys. To get out of here. Any ideas from the audience? I shared a web link and now I want to go back. How do I escape? Oh, maybe that way.
Are you just trying to find your
slideshow back again? I'm trying to get back to my slideshow.
Just click on your screen.
Yep.
Don't close the window that you're on the Zoom, but reduce it, and your slideshow should be maybe hiding behind it.
Yeah, thank you. There we
You're
go.
welcome.
Okay.
Happy to help.
All right. So when we talk about Lepidoptera, basically here in Barnstable County, there are 25% more moth species than butterflies. And in general, moths lay far more eggs than butterflies do. So we're very conscious of butterflies because we're out during the day. They are brightly colored. They go flying past us. And so we know how important they are to our ecosystems. But in all honesty, moths are far more important. Let's look at their pollination piece, all right? Butterflies versus moths. There really is no contest. If you look, certainly the butterflies come, they get the nectar, and maybe they get some little pollen granules stuck on their skinny, slender little legs that sit way high up over the flower. But when you look at what many of the moths do, they do the buzzing piece that bumblebees do when they go into a flower. And they actually shake. I tried to find a video of it and couldn't. But they actually get into the flower and they vibrate, and you notice how fuzzy and hairy they are. So they get covered with pollen. And basically they are a far more efficient pollinator than the butterfly. Plus, there are more of them. So if you want to go find moths in particular and their caterpillars, what are you going to do? Well, let's start with butterflies. You see them nectaring, you can see them flying by, you can take pictures, you can catch them in a net. At this point, we tend to release them rather than stick pins in them. Moths, however, are at night. You have to go out at night. And this is also true for their caterpillars. So moths and caterpillars tend to get active after the sun goes down. And the easiest way is to take a flashlight and get out there and check your flowers in your garden, and you will find moths visiting your flowers. The second way is to set up a white screen with a UV light in particular, because moths are attracted to UV lights. Sit and wait, in especially the early hours of the night, and they will come visit. They are drawn to light, especially UV light. The second way you can see, the third way really, since I talked about flashlights, and you can get a UV flashlight, by the way. The third way is sugaring. So you make up a solution with jam. They prefer fermented fruit, so you can let it sit out for a little bit and get a little winey. You mix it with some water, and with a paintbrush, you go into the woods and actually paint the sugar mixture on the bark. And this is especially effective in September because of the types of moths that are around in September. They will be attracted to the sugaring, they will land on it, and they will feed on it. Now, the caterpillars, you have to pretty much kind of go hunting them. So this is why we're going to focus on host plants, and that's the connection in between knowing your host plants and knowing which moths or butterflies are likely to use them as a food source. I'll talk more about this in a minute. Collecting and hatching eggs. Frequently, if you find what's called a gravid female, or a female that's heavy with eggs, you can put her in a paper bag and she will go ahead and lay eggs. When our big silk moths were more common, we would frequently have them show up at porch lights and basically hang out on the sides of houses. And you could find them in the morning, and you would find that the females had just started laying eggs. The big silk moths do not live very long, and evidently have this incredible, it could just be physical pressure to get rid of all those eggs. But it is fairly easy to then hatch those eggs and raise them on their food source. And the third thing you can do is take out a white sheet, put it under a bush, and hit it with some, like an oak stake, basically hit the stems at the bottom, and the caterpillars will fall onto the sheet so that you can take a look at them and try to identify them. So host plants. There has been some research on looking at the number of Lepidoptera species for our northeastern plants. This is being publicized by Doug Tallamy in particular, and promoting these plants in particular to be adding to your properties. So in terms of trees and in terms of all of the plants you can possibly support to feed the caterpillars, oaks are far and away the best. All right, then come cherries, poplars, maple, and pine. I'm not going to talk about the trees today because they're harder to find the caterpillars on. And it's fewer people have trees in their yards than some of the other plants that I'll talk about. Shrubs, salix wins top place. Blueberries are second, which is a great plus for Cape Cod, as is bayberry and dogwood. So these 4 species are fairly common, and they're fairly common for us to add to our gardens if you are concerned about the decline in native plants. And finally, the winner in the perennials are the goldenrod, then asters, sunflowers, and black-eyed Susans. And all of these attract pollinators as well, as do many of the shrubs. So you're basically accomplishing two goals by planting these keystone genera versus some other ones that you might do. All right, so I wanted to highlight some of the caterpillars that you might find in your yard in particular. And there's bias here because there are so many plants, and any native plant is going to have caterpillars feeding on it unless somebody close by is using pesticides and reducing, and there's drift that's killing the caterpillars. I picked the buttonbush because it's a great pollinator. It is a woody shrub. It's attractive. The disadvantage is that it does get quite large. It tends, in a native ecosystem or landscape, it likes to have its feet pretty damp, but it does work in our yards here as well. So here are a few that visit, and I will also say that as a woody shrub, many of the three that you see on the page here are also generalists. They will feed on a number of other woody shrubs. So just some highlights about what you might see. You can see that the Promethea moth is one of our silk moths. It was one of the ones that was more common in the past. It's a little bit smaller than a Cecropia or a Luna, if you know them, but still has that classic silk moth shape. When it first hatches, the caterpillars are gregarious. They feed together, and you will notice there is a significant change between one instar and the next. As they get larger, they then feed singly, and they have definitely changed color and have added these protuberances on different parts of them. This caterpillar then uses dried leaves and attaches the cocoon, basically the curled up, and reinforces the stem of that dried leaf so it hangs on through all of our winter winds. The sphinx moths, I am going to show you quite a few of them because we do have a lot of sphinx moths here on the Cape. They feed on a lot of woody plants. This hydrangea sphinx does feed on arborescens hydrangeas, the native hydrangea. It is a classic sphinx caterpillar. You see this horn on the end. Those of you that are gardeners know that our tomato hornworm is a sphinx moth, and different ones of them, they will frequently have stripes on a green body and also some dots, but many of them get quite large, anywhere from 2 to 5 inches in size. And right now I'll put a plug in for the tomato hornworm. When I was growing up on a farm, we always killed them. You know, you find a tomato hornworm, we killed them. But looking back, I never actually saw them do so much damage that the entire tomato plant got defoliated. Here on the Cape, I know friends that have them in their gardens. I have not seen one in my garden. So, and I grow a whole row of tomatoes. Now, one thing I forgot to talk about here, I have late June, late summer, and I can't see this one because it's covered up. Those are when you're most likely to find the mature caterpillars. And I will tell you how to find that information when we get through a few slides about the native plants. But we're talking about mature. Now, this is a little bit with a little wiggle room here because spring comes so late to Cape Cod, especially down in the Chatham area. So basically you're thinking about, okay, these guys are eating tree leaves or shrub leaves. Many of the species like the tender fresh leaves. So when you see those leaves emerging, you know that probably the eggs are hatching, and most of the caterpillars are going to be done that particular stage in a couple of weeks. So that's why some of these I bumped back a little bit because the book that has the information is for Eastern North America. So it has a pretty wide range on some of these. Okay, and this last one, Harris's 3-spot, I chose because part of what I want you to get excited about is the fact that caterpillars come in all different sizes, shapes, colors, camouflages, and everything else. Many of them mimic bird droppings, and this one even goes so far as to exude this oily substance that makes them even look kind of gooey, like a bird dropping. Okay, clethra is a favorite one for people to be putting in their yards. It is a great pollinator, smells wonderful, and does have a number of caterpillars visiting it. So the unicorn caterpillar is one. This one happens to be sitting on a stem, but it will feed on the edges of leaves. So if you see this lined up on the edge of a leaf, it very much looks like a leaf that is dying on the edge and then mixed in with a little green. So you'll find that you need to be a really good looker. Kids are great at seeing things. So take a grandchild out if you have one handy, because they frequently find things before you do. But this one is one of your inchworms, right? The large lace border. It is quite thin, probably about 2 millimeters wide when it's mature. And it has a defensive behavior where it sticks straight out and looks just like a twig. You will notice the little divisions on its body are even twig-like. And sometimes their heads and their tails will actually look like a node. This one almost does at this end. So, all right. Virginia creeper has become one of my favorite plants as I've done these webinars, because so many of our moths here in this area feed on it. And it turns this beautiful red color in the fall. And I used to pull it up in my gardens, but then I realized, just because it's a weed, right? You grow up knowing what weeds are. But it has a place. It can climb up fences, it can climb up tree trunks, and it has a large number of moths that will use it as a host plant. So I like this poster because it shows all of the diversity that a Virginia creeper will support. This isn't even all of them, but it gives you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 moths that are all common on the Cape, along with beetles and some other things there that they support. So a plug for Virginia creeper. Here are a few of them that use it. All right. Here again, we have 3 sphinxes, 3 very different ones. You'll notice this one does not have the tail on it, but you can still see that general shape is the same. And I didn't talk about this before, but sphinx moths all have these extremely triangular wings and a very thick pointed body. You'll see these guys all have the same thing. So these 3 are the sphinx moths in various combinations. This is sort of your classic sphinx moth that's pale green with a nice horn. This guy rears back as his defensive behavior, putting on kind of a show. And this one, actually, a common adaptation is a little eye spot on their abdomen, which then eventually does grow into a horn. But when they're little, many caterpillars will have some sort of different coloration on the end of their body, on the posterior end. And the thought is that attracts predators to that part of the body rather than to the head, which is far more important. All right. I was thinking today when I was looking through my slides that I didn't give you any size comparison. So this sphinx is probably about 3 inches if it spread its wings across this way. And so this caterpillar is also 2.5 to 3. This one, on the other hand, is a little bit smaller at 2 inches, as is this one. And this little wood nymph up here with the bright coloring and the crazy colored stripes and dots on the caterpillar, this is a much smaller moth. It's about probably 1.5 inches across when it's spread. And this would be relatively smaller also. So here you see late July through October. When you see that kind of a spread, you know that there is more than one generation of caterpillar being produced throughout the summer. Whereas down here with the lettered sphinx, the mature caterpillars are going to be found May to June, and so they only have one generation. All All right, another one. I like sumac on the edges of yards. Not everybody does because it does spread, but I also have to give a plug for poison ivy. Now, I am extremely allergic to poison ivy, and certainly I don't want it in my gardens. But if you have an area of your yard that isn't used, that you're turning back into sort of a native area, poison ivy is a native plant and it supports a number of moths in our ecosystem. And the birds love the seeds. So there's a downside to that, right? So here are a couple that live on sumac and poison ivy. This is the showy emerald. This moth is only about an inch across and extremely delicate, but it is one that used to come to lights all the time. The caterpillar has these great, it looks almost like a dinosaur, maybe a stegosaurus, right? He's not very big. He has these little horns on the back end, again, making a predator think that he ought to go for this part of the body instead of the more vital part of the head part. And the funny thing about this one is, depending on the age of the leaves, the size of these flanges change. So very, and they actually kind of match the catkins that are produced. So early on, they tend to be more kind of feathery and stick out more. And as they get older, they flatten down more. This one I put in here because it really is a very plain caterpillar green, and many, many, many of them are. It makes them very hard to see on leaves. But a delicious little morsel for birds. And not only the caterpillars have defensive behaviors, but the moths, many of the moths do too. So you'll notice this one is sticking its abdomen, the tip of its abdomen up in the air. And again, a predator coming in here is probably going to go for something that's closer rather than something that's down near the surface. And viburnum, common species, again, to have in our gardens. This is our high bush cranberry, dentata, and do I have nudum here? Maybe not. You thought I was going to have, these are both high bush cranberries, and this is dentatum, right? Very successful native species in our yards. And here are 4 of the beautiful moths and caterpillars that accompany them. This one, I just love this butterfly. And when I was collecting butterflies when I was little, I always wanted to catch one, and I never did. Its favorite host plant is turtlehead, the perennial, but it will switch over to viburnums as it gets older. So this is a late instar. It's an early maturing caterpillar. The Upper Cape has these. I've never seen one here down in this way. Rose tip, you notice again the great camouflaging here, mostly brown, looking like a dead leaf with a little bit of green. And this is also has this long hook on the back end. Again, they suspect it's for predator defense. A favorite, many of you, if you are gardeners and have flowering plants, have probably seen this one. This is one of those exceptions to the rule. This is a moth. You see the thick body. It is in the Sphinx family, as you can tell with the caterpillar. And it's the first time you see it, you think you've seen a miniature hummingbird. They behave quite a bit like hummingbirds, but it is a daytime moth. And the horrid zale, I don't know who gave it this name, but I love it, right? And notice how camouflaged it is. I mean, you're gonna have to really look for that one, but they're around from May to November. But my suspicion is even if you beat that stem, it is unlikely to fall down because he's pretty well anchored to that stem. Sweet fern, another favorite for those of us that have some shade and want to have some different types of plants in our gardens. And here you go, again, gang feeding on the sweet fern with a lovely caterpillar as it gets older, and then it feeds by itself. Another one of our inchworms, June until hard frost. Underwings, one of my favorites. The moths are out later and come to sugaring quickly at night. And their behavior is to flash these underwings to scare off predators, rather like big eye fox. And the chain dotted geometer, again, a crazy looking caterpillar. Oop. Oh my goodness, I wanted to show that. And Enothera, I picked this one because it's common, grows quickly here and easily. But notice where that caterpillar is feeding, on those ugly seed heads, which I think I cut down in the oyster pond last year. And now I'll have to leave them. All right, this is the primrose moth. You will see this one during the day, and it's lovely. It's a pink and a yellow. I wanted to show it nectaring, but it's just a gorgeous, only about 1.5 inches across. And here's that same caterpillar that I have on my title slide. You will notice the caterpillars vary in color at times. So this is a wavy line sphinx. They are all across the United States. Beautiful, beautiful sphinx moth. And I think this was my last host plant. So blueberries, remember, they are one of the top keystone species. Most of us that grow them don't have any success getting blueberries because everything eats the blueberries, but you're supporting the system, right? So 217 species in the United States. We have a much smaller number of Lepidoptera that use them, but here we have the fall cankerworm. Notice the incredible camouflaging here against bark. The spiny oak slug, again, defense mechanisms. Who wants to eat that, right? But a great pollinating moth, fuzz everywhere. Here I put in these two. These are in the same family of butterflies, just showing you how carefully you have to look and how well camouflaged they can be. So Henry's elfin and the spring azure sitting right in the middle of the flower parts, munching away. We have both of these on the Cape. Actually, everything I've shown you, I double checked. And goldenrod, we have about 25 species in Massachusetts of the goldenrod itself. 104 species. Insect Lepidoptera use it throughout the eastern United States. We have far less of them, but many of them you can find on the flower heads themselves. And it's a common flower here for us, several species on the Cape. And you don't have to bend down, or they're out. These guys tend to be out during the day also, right? So this is one of the poster child caterpillars, just because the coloring is so gorgeous. Okay, so you go out, you find caterpillars, and then what do? There are 2 great books. This one, I believe, is still available at the Museum of Natural History in Brewster. It is specific to Cape Cod. It is the butterflies. It is published, I can tell you quickly because I have it here. I believe it's a little outdated because we've lost 2004 because our butterfly population has gone down. This came out in, I think, 2009. And it's fabulous. I mean, if I had known this was around when I was little, I probably would have become a caterpillar hunter, right? And this is where I'm getting the information on the time that you're most likely to find the caterpillars. So I highly recommend this as a resource. Secondly, iNaturalist. I expect many of you have used it. Keep hitting my clicker. But what is nice is they're showing you when those photos have come in. And so you can get a sense of when you're more likely to see them also. Now, this is for all of the United States. So think about when the Luna moth, for instance, if you look up its host plant, the mature caterpillars are going to be feeding early when those leaves come out. And so the moths will be, a certain amount of time after that. Again, need to do some research, right? So that's iNaturalist. The bug guide, if you need some identification, far more adults on here than caterpillars, but it's a start. And we do have a Massachusetts moth website. Again, we'll narrow down the number of species to help you figure out what you're looking at. There is a National Moth Week towards the end of July when there are a number of more adult species around and flying than at other times of the year. It has great information about moths on it and also some information about finding them and looking for them. And Xerces is the Society for the Invertebrate Conservation, and you can subscribe to it and get updates on the status of invertebrates in the world. So here are my hopes, all right, that you're once again impressed with the amazing diversity of Lepidoptera and especially caterpillars, that you're concerned about the decline and plant native host plants for them to use. Best is an oak, but not all of us have room on our properties. Cherries, maples, poplars. I actually read that somebody plants oaks and then purposely chops them off because he doesn't want to get a great big huge tree, but does get all of those extra leaves by forcing them into like a bush. Not something I want to see, but just a thought. Hedges of shrubs, you know, a hedge of Leland cypress is a desert. You've probably heard that. But a hedge with blueberries, serviceberries, viburnums, creeper, greenbrier, poison ivy, they all contribute to the first level consumers. Please, no spraying. The sprays they use affect the majority of insects, if not all of them. And one of the things to say that you may have heard before is our silk moth population, those big, beautiful, gorgeous moths that used to get people excited about insects, have been affected by the spraying for the gypsy moth, which they now call the spongy moth. There is no doubt that there's been a serious decline in moth populations since they basically worked on, and that's, you know, a concern. If your plants are getting eaten, that's okay. If they're getting decimated, it's not okay. But if they're getting eaten, if they're getting decimated, chances are it's by an invasive. There are invasive moths as well. That you leave the leaf litter in place throughout the year, that you leave some soft ground for the caterpillars to burrow into, that you get out in the dark and visit with the nightlife in your garden, and that you're lucky to see American silk moth. Okay, I hope I left some time for questions. Not bad.
Absolutely, Beth, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. If anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, or put it in the chat box. And I did have a question, Beth, and of course now I can't remember what it was about. Oh, a general question about moths. What about those moths that eat our sweaters? Are those? What do we do about those?
Those moths have been part of the human population for a very long time because wool has been used for a very long time. And we transport them when we move from place to place to place. Yeah. So yes, it's a Lepidoptera. I didn't mention, but there are, I think I read more than 60% of the Lepidoptera are microlepidoptera moths.
Wow.
You basically need a microscope to tell them apart. And you have to be a real expert.
Oh.
You know, we're not even talking about those. So,
okay.
But go ahead and treat your sweaters.
Okay, thank you.
Mothballs work just fine.
Anything else? Does anybody have any other questions? So as I did mention, these slides and the video will be available on our YouTube channel and posted to our website if you want to share them with anyone, as well as the presentation that Beth did last year that is up on our website for viewing, which is such a great library we have there. We have a couple of a few more webinars coming up. Next week we'll be talking with Eamon Caffrey from Audubon about the sea turtle, the cold stunned sea turtles and their rescue efforts. And then we wind up our winter webinar series with birds, both with Phil Kyle and James Junda. If you want more information, please go to our website and join us again. Beth, thank you. Everybody, I hope you
You're
have a
welcome.
wonderful weekend.
Yep, you too.